She always thought the worst thing her father ever did to her was the slap. But looking back now, she knows the worst thing was the silence after. The way he straightened his collar, walked to his armchair, and picked up his newspaper like nothing had happened at all. Nadia's name was not in that file. She was 31 years old, a registered nurse at St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto, and she had spent the better part of a decade quietly convincing herself that what happened inside the walls of her parents' Scarborough home was just how families were. Strict, old-fashioned, difficult to understand from the outside. She had been wrong about that too. The day it all started, the day everything she thought she knew about herself began to crack, was a Tuesday in late October. The kind of gray, wet Tuesday that Toronto does better than anywhere else in the world, where the sky sits so low you feel like you could reach up and press your hand flat against it. Nadia had just come off a 12-hour shift. Her feet hurt, her back hurt. There was dried coffee on the sleeve of her jacket, and she hadn't eaten since noon. She drove to her parents' house in Scarborough because her mother had called 3 times that afternoon, and with her mother, 3 calls always meant something. Her father, Harold, was sitting at the kitchen table when she walked in. Her mother, Constance, was standing at the counter with her arms folded the way she always stood when she was trying to make herself smaller than she was. Harold had a piece of paper in front of him. He had his reading glasses on. "Sit down," he said. "Not hello. Not how was your shift. Not you look tired, Nadia. Let me make you tea. Just sit down." She sat. The paper was a printout of a job posting, administrative coordinator at a financial firm downtown. Harold had circled it in red pen. He slid it across the table toward her like it was an ultimatum. "You're going to apply for this," he said. Nadia looked at the paper. She looked at her father. She thought about the 12-hour shift. She thought about the patient she had held the hand of that afternoon, while he cried because he didn't understand his diagnosis, and there was no one else in the room. She thought about what it had taken her to get her nursing license, the years of studying at kitchen tables like this one, the clinical hours, the exams, the nights she had doubted herself completely. "Dad," she said carefully, "I have a job." "You have a job that keeps you on your feet for 12 hours cleaning up after strangers," Harold said. "This is a real career, office hours, benefits, pension. You'd be home by 5:30 every day." "I don't want to be home by 5:30 every day," Nadia said. "I want to be a nurse. I am a nurse." That was when he slapped her. Not hard enough to knock her sideways, hard enough to make the sound. Hard enough that Constance flinched and looked away toward the window over the sink, and Nadia understood in that moment, as clearly as she had ever understood anything, that her mother was not going to say a single word. The kitchen was very quiet. The fridge hummed. Harold picked up his newspaper from the counter and walked to his armchair in the living room. Constance began running the tap. Nadia sat at the table for what felt like a long time. Her cheek was warm. She pressed her fingertips to it and stared at the job posting with its red circle and thought, "I am 31 years old. I have a degree. I have a career I love. I take care of people for a living. And my father just slapped me across the face because I said I wanted to keep doing it." She drove home. She did not cry until she was in her apartment, in the shower, with the water turned up as hot as she could stand it. And even then, she wasn't crying because of the slap. She was crying because of Constance standing at the sink. She was crying because of the newspaper. Nadia's apartment was a 1-bedroom on Danforth, above a Portuguese bakery that filled the whole building with the smell of bread every morning at 5 a.m. She had lived there for 4 years. She had a cat named after the street she grew up on, a wall of plants that were mostly thriving, and a shelf of nursing textbooks she still pulled out sometimes just to remind herself how much she knew. She had built her life quietly and carefully, exactly the way she wanted it. Not the way Harold wanted it. Not the way Constance nodded along to when Harold described it. Her way. She didn't go back to Scarborough for 3 weeks. Constance called. Nadia answered. Listened to her mother say things like, "Your father means well, and you know how he is, and he just wants what's best for you." And said, "Yes, Mom," and "Okay, Mom," and felt something inside her chest go quietly, steadily numb. She told her friend Justine about it over coffee at the kitchen table, a Saturday morning, both of them in their pajamas. Justine was a social worker. She had heard stories far worse than Nadia's, but she listened the way she always listened, completely, without looking at her phone, without trying to fix it immediately. "What did you do after?" Justine asked. "I drove home," Nadia said. "Did you tell anyone?" "I'm telling you." Justine looked at her for a moment. "You know that wasn't okay, right? What he did." "I know," Nadia said. "Do you? Because you said it like it was a weather report." Nadia wrapped both hands around her mug. Outside, the first snow of the season was coming down over Danforth, thin and unconvinced, not yet sticking. She had grown up being told that Harold's anger was just his way of showing he cared, that the slaps and the silences and the orders given at kitchen tables were just how their family operated. She had been told this so many times and by so many people, her aunts, her grandmother, her mother most of all, that she had started to believe it the way you believe something you've never actually thought to question. I think I know, she said. Justine reached over and put her hand on Nadia's. That's a start. The man Nadia had been seeing for 8 months was named Warren. She had met him in the waiting room of a walk-in clinic on a night, when she'd come in after her shift to get a blister on her heel looked at, and he'd been there with what turned out to be a fairly minor ear infection. He was a high school history teacher. He made his own pasta on weekends. He had a loud, genuine laugh and an inability to walk past a used bookstore without going in. Nadia had liked him immediately and completely, which was unusual for her. She was careful with people. She had learned to be. But Warren was easy in a way that felt new. Easy to talk to, easy to be quiet with, easy to trust. She brought him to Scarborough the following spring. She should have known better. She had spent months letting herself believe that things with Harold might be different if he just met Warren, if he just saw how good things were going, if he just had a chance to understand that Nadia's life was actually working out fine. Harold shook Warren's hand at the door and said nothing. At dinner, he asked Warren what his family background was in a way that wasn't a question so much as an investigation. Warren answered calmly and politely. Constance refilled glasses and agreed with everything Harold said, and pretended not to notice the temperature dropping around the table. On the way home, Warren was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "He doesn't like me. He doesn't like anyone I choose," Nadia said. "Has he always been like that?" She thought about how to answer that. She thought about all the kitchen table conversations that ended in silences and slamming chairs, and her mother appearing the next morning with nothing to say about it. She thought about the slap in October. "Yes," she said, "he has." Warren nodded slowly. He didn't say anything else, but he reached over and held her hand the rest of the way home, and she looked out the window at the highway lights blurring past and thought, this is what it's supposed to feel like. Just this. Right here. It was 3 months later that Harold told her he needed money. He didn't call it that. Harold never called things what they were. He said he needed help with an investment situation. He said it was temporary. He said he would pay her back in 90 days, with interest. It was a sure thing. He had done his research. He had a man he trusted involved. The amount he named was $40,000. Nadia sat across from him at that same kitchen table and felt the number land in her chest like something cold and heavy. $40,000 was 3 years of saving carefully around rent and student loan payments, and the cost of living in a city that got more expensive every year. It was her emergency fund. It was the down payment she had been slowly, patiently building for a place of her own. She asked him what the investment was. He was vague. She asked him who the man was that he trusted. He was vaguer. She asked him to send her the paperwork so she could look it over. Harold's face changed. "I am your father," he said. "I don't need to send you paperwork. I need you to trust me." "I do trust you, Dad," Nadia said, and she was surprised to find that this was not entirely a lie, that some part of her still, against all available evidence, wanted to believe in him. "I just want to understand what I'm looking at before I write a check for $40,000. After everything I have done for you," Harold said. His voice was getting quieter, which was always worse than when it was loud. "Every sacrifice your mother and I made, your education, this house, and you sit there and tell me you need paperwork. I'm not saying I won't help you. I'm saying I want to understand it first." He stood up from the table. "Get out of my house." Constance from the doorway. "Harold," I said, "get out." Nadia drove home. She called Justine. She sat on her kitchen floor with her back against the cabinets and her cat in her lap, and Justine talked her through it slowly, practically, the way Justine always did when things got very bad. "Don't give him the money," Justine said. "He's my father." "I know. Don't give him the money." Nadia didn't sleep much that night. She kept running the math in her head, kept trying to find a version where it worked, where she helped her father, and didn't lose everything she had built. There wasn't one. She didn't give him the money. What happened next happened fast, the way ruptures do once they finally begin. Harold called her twice. When she didn't answer, he called Warren. Nadia didn't know how he'd gotten the number, and she didn't want to think about it too hard. Warren told her about it the next evening, sitting at her kitchen table with 2 cups of tea between them, his expression careful. "He told me I was a bad influence on you," Warren said. "That I'd turned you against your family, that if I was any kind of decent man I'd encourage you to do the right thing." Nadia put down her mug. "What did you say?" I said I wasn't going to get in the middle of a financial decision between Nadia and her father, that it wasn't my place, and that I thought she was a very capable adult who could make her own choices. She looked at him across the table. That's exactly what you should have said. I know. He paused. He didn't like it. He doesn't like anything that doesn't go his way. Warren was quiet for a moment. Then, Nadia, how long has this been going on? She knew what he was asking. The full answer would have taken hours. She gave him the condensed version. The slap in October, the pattern of it going back years before that, the way Constance had learned to be invisible in her own home so thoroughly that Nadia had grown up thinking that was just what mothers did. Warren listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't try to fix it or explain it, or offer unsolicited opinions about what she should do. When she finished, he said, I'm sorry you grew up with that. That was it. That was all. And somehow it was the most useful thing anyone had ever said to her about it. Because it didn't make it her fault. And it didn't make it something she should have handled differently. And it didn't make her father's behavior into a love language she was too ungrateful to understand. It just said, that was wrong and I'm sorry it happened to you. She cried. Not because she was sad exactly, but because something that had been held very tight for a very long time was loosening, and it turned out that loosening hurt too, just differently. She did not speak to Harold for 4 months. Constance called every week and Nadia answered when she could, and the conversations were always the same, careful and circling and ending without anything real being said. Her mother was not a bad woman. Nadia had spent years being angry at her and had arrived, slowly and not without difficulty, at something more complicated than anger, a kind of heartbroken understanding. Constance had made her own choices, or she had let Harold make them for her so long that the difference had disappeared. Either way, she wasn't going to change. Nadia had stopped waiting for her to. Work was good. It was always good. She had requested a transfer to the ICU the previous winter, and it was hard in ways she hadn't entirely anticipated. But there was something about the level of focus required that she had found steadying during the months when the rest of her life felt unsteady. Her manager, a woman named Ruth, the one name she'd inherited from her grandmother and worn like armor, had told her she was one of the strongest nurses on the floor. She had written it in the performance review. Nadia had read it 3 times and then kept the paper in her desk drawer at home. Not because she needed the validation, but because it was useful to have proof, on the days she doubted herself, that the life she had chosen was the one she was actually built for. Warren came to her parents' house exactly 1 more time, and not because Nadia invited him. Her uncle, her mother's brother, a quiet and steady man named Gordon, who had always occupied the peripheral edges of her childhood in a way she'd never fully appreciated, had organized a family dinner in November, the kind of low-key gathering where the purpose was just to be in the same room together for a few hours. He had asked Nadia directly, and she had trusted him enough to say yes. Harold was civil, not warm, not apologetic, but civil in the way people are civil when they've calculated that open hostility will cost them more than it's worth. He shook Warren's hand. He asked him how school was going. He sat across from Nadia and looked at her with an expression she recognized, not regret exactly, but the closest thing Harold was capable of to it. She didn't soften. She wasn't ready to, and she had stopped feeling guilty about not being ready. But she sat at that table and got through the dinner and drove home afterward, with Warren's hand over hers on the gear shift, and she thought, I can exist in the same room as you and not lose myself. That's something. That's actually a lot. The money situation resolved itself in a way that was almost funny if you had a dark enough sense of humor about it, which Nadia had developed, over time, out of necessity. Harold's investment, whatever it had actually been, fell through. He lost money, though not as much as he would have if Nadia had given him $40,000 to add to it. He did not apologize for asking her. He did not acknowledge that she had been right to say no, but Constance told her in a phone call one Sunday morning, with great care and in a tone of voice that suggested she understood the significance of what she was saying, that Harold had spoken to someone at the bank and was getting things sorted out on his own. On his own. Nadia had stood at her kitchen window and watched a streetcar go by on Danforth and thought, good, that's how it should have been all along. What she hadn't expected was the conversation with Gordon. He called her the week after the family dinner, asked if she wanted to grab coffee, and they sat in a Tim Hortons in Scarborough on a Saturday afternoon, and he told her, quietly, straightforwardly, the way Gordon did everything, that he had been watching what Harold did to her for years, and he was sorry he hadn't said more sooner. He said it had taken him time to understand that staying quiet in the name of family harmony was its own kind of harm. He said he was proud of her. She almost didn't know what to do with that. Being proud of wasn't something anyone in her family had said to her in a long time. Not like this. Not without conditions. She said thank you and meant it completely. It was spring again by the time things settled into something that felt like a new kind of normal. Not the old normal, which had never been normal at all, just familiar. Something new. Something she had made herself. She and Warren talked about the future the way people talk about it when they're being careful not to jinx it, and also not being quite careful enough. He was going to apply for a department head position. She was doing a continuing education course in critical care. They were talking, with increasing specificity, about what kind of place they wanted and what neighborhoods made sense, and whether a second bedroom for a home office was a luxury or a reasonable need. She still talked to Constance. She had made her peace, as much as she was going to, with what her mother was and wasn't capable of. She visited on her own terms now, on her own timeline, and she left when she needed to and did not apologize for it. She and Harold did not have a grand reconciliation. There was no moment where he sat across from her and told her he had been wrong. She had stopped waiting for that scene. She had realized, somewhere along the way, that waiting for it was a way of putting her life on hold for something that might never arrive, and her life was too good now, and too genuinely hers to keep it on hold for him. What there was instead was a Sunday in April, a warm one, the kind that feels like permission, the kind Toronto earns after every long winter. When she arrived at her parents' house to help Constance in the garden, Harold came out onto the back steps with 2 cups of tea and set one down on the railing near where Nadia was pulling up dead growth from the previous fall. He didn't say anything. She didn't say anything. They stood in the same back garden where she had grown up, and she drank the tea and it was decent, and the lilacs along the fence were beginning to come up, and that was all. That was the whole of it. Sometimes things don't end clean. Sometimes they just become manageable, become something you can stand in the same garden with and drink tea and not fall apart. She drove home that afternoon with the windows down and music on, and Warren waiting at her apartment with dinner half made. She parked on Danforth and sat in the car for a moment before she went up, just taking stock the way she had started doing, just asking herself, "Are you okay?" and meaning it as a real question, not a formality. She was okay. More than okay, actually. She was exactly where she had decided to be, doing exactly the work she had decided was worth doing, with exactly the people she had chosen to keep close. It had cost her things to get here. It had cost her the illusion of a certain kind of family, and a certain kind of father, and a certain kind of peace that turned out not to have been peace at all. Just the absence of the courage to want something different. She went upstairs. Warren had made her favorite. The cat was sitting on the counter, being told to get off the counter. The apartment smelled like bread from the bakery below, and something warm from the stove. And the evening light was doing the particular thing it does in April in Toronto, coming in low and golden through the west-facing windows, the kind of light that makes the most ordinary room look briefly miraculous. Nadia dropped her keys in the bowl by the door and thought, I chose this. Every single part of this I chose. And that had made all the difference.